Imagine moving your family into what you thought was your dream home, only to be harassed, beaten, and framed by corrupt cops, until your Navy SEAL brothers arrive to turn the tables. "You don't belong here." That was the first sentence Derek Cole heard from his new neighbor on the day he unloaded the last box from the moving truck. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't even said with anger. It was muttered, almost like a warning. And though Derek tried to shrug it off, those words stuck in his head as he stood in the driveway of his new home in suburban Texas, sweat dripping down his forehead, his kids running circles around the front yard, and his wife calling for him to help with the boxes. Derek was 37 years old, a Navy veteran who had spent nearly 2 decades serving overseas. He'd done tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He'd seen combat. He'd seen men break under pressure. But what he wanted now was simple. Peace. A safe street for his kids to ride their bikes. A backyard where he could barbecue on Sundays. A home he could finally call his own. That was the dream. The house itself was modest but solid. A 2-story brick home with a wide garage and a patch of green lawn he couldn't wait to maintain. For him, this was victory. After years of deployments and separation from his family, he'd finally earned stability. His wife Simone was glowing with excitement, already sketching ideas for the garden. His son Caleb was racing his little sister Mia down the sidewalk, their laughter filling the air. But the neighborhood wasn't as welcoming as they had hoped. Some neighbors waved politely, but others lingered a little too long, staring in silence. Derek noticed curtains shifting when he walked by, and the hushed conversations that seemed to stop whenever his family appeared. That evening, as Derek sat on the porch with a cold beer, a man in his late 50s walked up. Slim build, clean polo shirt tucked into khakis, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as Mark Ridley, president of the Homeowners Association. "Mr. Cole," Ridley said, his voice clipped. "I just want to welcome you to the neighborhood. We have a few standards here that we take very seriously. I'll send you a copy of our regulations." Derek smiled, trying to keep things cordial. "Appreciate that. I take care of my home. You won't have any problems with me." Ridley's eyes flicked toward Derek's flagpole, where the American flag fluttered in the breeze. "That flagpole looks about 2 feet taller than what's permitted." "We'll need to address that." Derek blinked, caught off guard. "I served under that flag for nearly 20 years. I'm not lowering it." Ridley gave a thin smile, the kind that wasn't friendly. "We'll see." That was the first crack in the picture-perfect neighborhood Derek thought he had bought into. Within days, Ridley was back. This time it was about the trash cans being too visible from the street. Then about the basketball hoop in the driveway. Then about the children's laughter being too loud in the evening. It was never-ending. Simone tried to reassure him. "He's just the type who needs control. If we ignore him, maybe he'll back off." But Derek knew better. He'd seen men like Ridley before, the kind who pick at you, test your patience, and push you until you react. One afternoon, as Derek was washing his car in the driveway, Ridley approached again. "You might want to watch how often you have visitors," Ridley said, glancing at Derek's cousin who had stopped by. "This isn't that kind of neighborhood." Derek put the sponge down, his jaw tightening. "What kind of neighborhood is that, Mark?" Ridley held his gaze for a moment before replying, "One with standards." Then he walked away. The comment stung. Derek had fought too hard in his life to let someone like Ridley make him feel like an outsider in his own home. He told himself he wouldn't let this man drag him into a fight. But something told him this was only the beginning. That night, as Derek tucked his kids into bed, he caught himself staring out the window, scanning the street, noticing Ridley's car parked longer than usual near the corner. His instincts, honed from years in the military, told him something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the thought that Ridley wasn't just a nuisance, he was a threat waiting to escalate. But the real danger wasn't Mark Ridley alone. It was who he called when he wanted to turn his grudges into power. The next morning, Derek stepped outside to grab the paper and noticed something taped to his front door. A bright yellow slip of paper, official-looking, with bold lettering at the top. Notice of violation. The reason? Improper placement of trash receptacles. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. The cans were exactly where the city ordinance required them to be. But this wasn't about city rules. This was about Ridley. Simone found him standing there, the paper crumpled in his hand. Another one? She asked. Yeah, Derek muttered. He's not going to stop. It became a rhythm. Every few days, another violation. Grass too long, cars parked too close to the curb, decorative lights too bright. Derek kept records, photos, everything he needed to prove the complaints were bogus. But it wore him down. And worse, it started to wear on his family. One evening, while grilling in the backyard, his kids asked if they could invite friends from school over. Before Derek could answer, Simone gave him a look. She didn't want the kids to feel punished, but she also didn't want to give Ridley more ammunition. Maybe not right now, she said softly. Caleb frowned. Why? It's just a sleepover. Derek forced a smile. We'll do it soon, buddy. I promise. But inside, he felt anger boiling. His kids were being made to feel like they didn't belong, all because one man had decided they were the problem. Ridley wasn't subtle about his disdain. He often stopped on the sidewalk to inspect Derek's property, jotting notes on his clipboard while pretending to be polite if Simone caught him. Once Derek overheard him talking to another neighbor, a middle-aged woman with a small dog. We'll get this under control. Don't you worry, Ridley told her, as though Derek's family was some sort of infestation. Finally, Derek confronted him. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and Derek was mowing the lawn when Ridley walked over, papers in hand. Mr. Cole, Ridley said, your fence needs repainting. HOA guidelines are very clear. Derek cut the engine and wiped sweat from his brow. Mark, this fence was painted 6 months ago by the previous owner. It doesn't need a thing, Ridley smirked. Our standards are higher than that. Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen, I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not going to keep letting you harass my family. My kids deserve better than this nonsense. Ridley tilted his head, his smile widening. Problem? There's no problem. Unless you want there to be. Then, almost casually, he added, You know, a friend of mine on the police force lives nearby. Good man. He doesn't take kindly to rule breakers. That was the first time Derek heard Ridley mention the cops. Something in the way he said it wasn't casual. It was a threat. Later that night, Simone tried to calm him. He's bluffing. He can't just sick the police on us. But Derek wasn't so sure. His gut told him Ridley had more influence than he let on. The next week proved him right. Derek was driving home from work when flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. He pulled over, confused. He hadn't been speeding. When the officer approached, his name tag read Halverson. The tone was cold from the start. License and registration, Halverson demanded. What's the stop for, officer? Derek asked, handing over his ID. Broken taillight, Halverson said. Derek knew that was a lie. His car was practically new, but arguing wasn't worth it. He kept his voice steady, his hands visible, every movement deliberate. Halverson stared at him longer than necessary before finally letting him go with a warning. When Derek pulled into his driveway, he saw Ridley standing in his yard, chatting with another man in uniform. The second officer, stockier, with sharp eyes, introduced himself later as Kyle Mercer. The connection was clear. These were Ridley's friends. From then on, things escalated quickly. Derek began noticing a police car parked near his street, sometimes at odd hours. Once, on his way to work, he was followed for nearly 15 minutes. When Simone went to the grocery store, she returned shaken, saying a patrol car had circled the lot twice while she loaded groceries into the trunk. This is intimidation, Derek said one night, pacing the living room. He's using his buddies to make us feel trapped. Simone's voice trembled. What are we supposed to do? We can't move again, Derek. This is our home. He sat down beside her, taking her hand. I won't let it. It was a Thursday evening when things boiled over for the first time. The sun had dipped low, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink, and Derek was helping Caleb with his math homework at the dining room table. Simone was in the kitchen preparing dinner, while Mia chased their dog around the living room, her laughter echoing through the house. It was a moment that felt normal, almost comforting, until a sharp knock rattled the front door. Derek pushed his chair back and opened it to find Mark Ridley standing on the porch, clipboard tucked under his arm as always. His expression was stiff, eyes darting past Derek to glimpse the family inside. "Evening, Mark," Derek said, forcing politeness. Ridley wasted no time. "Your children have been creating a disturbance again. Several neighbors have complained about the noise. This isn't a playground, Mr. Cole. This is a neighborhood of working families who deserve peace." Derek's jaw tightened. "They're playing in their own home." "That's not a disturbance," Simone, overhearing, stepped closer. "Is this really necessary, Mr. Ridley?" "They're just kids." Ridley gave her a tight smile. "Ma'am, rules are rules. If they can't respect them, there will be consequences." That word, consequences, hung in the air like smoke. Derek stepped onto the porch, lowering his voice. "You're harassing us. You've been on my property more times in the last month than I've seen my actual neighbors. It stops now." Ridley didn't flinch. "I don't think you understand how this works. The HOA has authority, and I intend to enforce it." Then, leaning slightly closer, he added, "You're not the kind of neighbor people around here want to have. If you won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to someone else." Simone crossed her arms. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ridley's smile widened. "I think you'll find out soon enough." With that, he turned and walked back down the driveway, clipboard tapping against his leg. The door shut, and Simone exhaled sharply. "He's threatening us now." "Derek, we can't let this go on." "I know," Derek said, running a hand over his face. "But if I react, he'll spin it as me being aggressive." That's what he wants. For a moment, the house was silent except for Mia's quiet humming in the living room. The tension was thick, pressing down on everyone inside. That weekend, Ridley made good on his threat. Derek was mowing the lawn when two uniformed officers approached, Halverson and Mercer. Both men moved with an air of casual authority, but their eyes carried something sharper. "Mr. Cole," Halverson said, stopping at the edge of the yard. "We've had reports of aggressive behavior toward a neighbor." Derek killed the mower and straightened up, sweat dripping down his temple. "Aggressive behavior? Toward who?" "Mr. Ridley," Mercer said flatly. "He claims you threatened him." Derek laughed bitterly. "Threatened him? He came onto my property again and told me my kids couldn't laugh in their own home." "That's the truth." Halverson's gaze hardened. "Watch your tone. We're not here to debate. We're here to keep the peace." Simone stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed protectively. "Officers, my husband hasn't threatened anyone. This is harassment. You should be questioning Mr. Ridley, not us." Mercer glanced at her, then back at Derek. "We'll be keeping an eye on this residence. Don't give us a reason to come back." They turned and walked away, but the message was clear. They weren't just enforcing the law. They were Ridley's enforcers. That night, Derek sat at the dining table long after the kids were asleep. His phone buzzed with a message from an old Navy buddy asking how civilian life was treating him. Derek typed out a reply, hesitated, then deleted it. How could he explain this? That after everything he'd survived overseas, the real battle was in his own neighborhood, against men hiding behind clipboards and badges? Simone placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat down. "We can't live like this, Derek." "I know," he said softly, "but moving isn't an option. And if I let him push us out, he wins. I won't give him that satisfaction." She touched his hand. "Then what do we do?" Derek stared at the flagpole outside the window, the stars and stripes catching the faint light of the street lamp. "We stand our ground, but we stay smart. He's trying to bait me into making a mistake. I won't give him that." Simone squeezed his hand, but the worry in her eyes said she wasn't convinced. Neither was Derek. He knew Ridley wasn't finished. He knew this was only the beginning. But when a man like Ridley decides to use the law as a weapon, the fight stops being about complaints. It becomes about survival. The weeks that followed felt like living under a microscope. Derek couldn't leave his driveway without seeing a patrol car creeping past. Sometimes it was Halverson, sometimes Mercer, and sometimes it was an unmarked cruiser that lingered at the end of the block long enough to make its presence clear. To the outside world, it looked like ordinary police activity. To Derek and his family, it was surveillance. One night, Simone whispered as they lay in bed, "They're trying to scare us into leaving." Derek stared at the ceiling. "Yeah, that's the plan. Make us feel trapped until we give up." The harassment wasn't random. It was calculated. One morning, Derek was pulled over again, this time by Mercer, who claimed Derek had rolled through a stop sign. Derek knew he hadn't, but arguing seemed pointless. Mercer leaned against the hood of his car, taking his time with the paperwork, making sure every neighbor saw Derek sitting there like a criminal. When Derek got home, Simone was waiting on the porch, arms folded tightly. "Another one?" she asked. "Stop sign this time," Derek muttered. "Didn't even happen." Simone's eyes filled with frustration. "They're trying to build a case. Piece by piece they'll paint you as hostile, dangerous, and Ridley will feed them every excuse he can." Inside, the kids were restless. Caleb asked why police cars always drove by their house, why they never stopped at anyone else's. Mia, only 7, had begun closing the curtains whenever she saw flashing lights in the distance. These weren't the lessons Derek wanted his children to learn about law enforcement. The tension came to a head one humid evening in late June. Derek was taking out the trash when Ridley appeared at the end of the driveway, arms folded, flanked by Halverson. The officer's presence wasn't casual. It was staged. "Evening, Mr. Cole," Ridley called out, his voice laced with smugness. "Looks like your cans are still visible from the street." "We've been over this." Derek set the bin down, forcing his voice to stay calm. "The city ordinance says they can't block the sidewalk." "They don't. You're making up your own rules." Ridley smirked and looked at Halverson, who stepped forward. "We've received multiple complaints. I'd advise you to comply." Derek crossed his arms. "Advise me? Or threaten me?" Halverson's hand rested casually on his duty belt. "We're here to keep order. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Simone came out of the house, her voice steady but sharp. "This is harassment." "My husband hasn't broken any laws. You're abusing your authority." Ridley tilted his head. "Careful, Mrs. Cole. Words like that can get you into trouble." Derek stepped between them, his voice dropping low. "I served this country for years. I know the difference between keeping the peace and targeting a family. You crossed that line a long time ago." For a moment, Halverson and Derek locked eyes. Derek recognized the look. It was the same cold stare he'd seen in conflict zones, the look of a man who wanted dominance, not justice. Finally, Halverson muttered, "We'll be back," and walked away with Ridley trailing smugly behind. That night, Derek sat at the kitchen table replaying the encounter in his head. Simone placed her hand on his shoulder. "They're setting you up," she whispered. "I know," Derek said. "But if I push back the wrong way, they'll twist it. I've got to be smarter than them." The stress seeped into every part of life. Derek's co-workers at the auto repair shop noticed he was quieter, more on edge. Simone began avoiding neighborhood gatherings, tired of the stares and whispers. Even the kids picked up on it. Caleb asked one night if they had done something wrong, why everyone seemed against them. Derek's heart broke trying to explain. But the worst was yet to come. Late one Friday night, after Derek returned from a long shift, he found Mercer parked directly across from his house. The officer didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there in his cruiser, headlights glaring at Derek's front door. Derek walked up to the car, his voice calm but firm. "Is there a reason you're sitting outside my house?" Mercer leaned out the window, smirking. "Just keeping an eye on things. Making sure the neighborhood's safe." "Safe from what?" Derek asked. Mercer's grin widened. "From troublemakers." Then he rolled the window up and stayed parked there another 20 minutes before finally driving off. When Derek walked back inside, Simone was waiting. Her voice trembled. "They're escalating. What happens when they decide to stop watching and start acting?" Derek looked at her, his mind racing. "Then we're in real danger." But what Derek didn't know was that the danger was coming sooner than he ever imagined, and it would arrive right at his front door. The day had been long and tense. Derek had stayed late at the shop, trying to drown his frustration in work, while Simone wrangled the kids at home. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the sky was black and the cicadas were buzzing loud in the warm Texas air. He was bone-tired, but his heart lifted when he saw the living room lights on and his kids' shadows dancing across the blinds. Home was supposed to be his sanctuary. He'd just set his keys on the counter when a thunderous knock rattled the door. Simone froze in the kitchen. Caleb and Mia peeked out from behind the couch, their bedtime routines interrupted. Derek's instincts flared instantly. This wasn't a neighbor. This was something else. He opened the door and found Officers Halverson and Mercer standing there, flanking the porch like wolves. Their expressions were hard, their posture rigid. Behind them, Mark Ridley stood back with his arms folded, a smirk plastered across his face, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Mr. Cole," Halverson said sharply, "we've had reports you were threatening neighbors again. We need to talk." Derek kept his tone even. "I haven't threatened anyone. This is harassment, and you know it." Mercer stepped forward. "Step outside, sir. We're not asking." Simone's voice rang out from behind Derek. "He doesn't have to go anywhere. Do you have a warrant?" Neither officer answered. Instead, Halverson shoved Derek in the chest, pushing him backward onto the porch. The sudden movement sent the kids screaming. Derek stumbled, but caught himself, his training snapping into place. He raised his hands, palms open. "Don't touch me," he said firmly. "I'm not resisting." Mercer grabbed Derek's arm and twisted it behind his back, slamming him against the siding of his own house. The sound of his shoulder hitting the wall echoed in the quiet street. "Daddy!" Caleb cried from the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Simone rushed forward, but Halverson blocked her path. "Stay back, Mom, unless you want to be arrested too." "This is my husband," she screamed. "You can't do this in front of our children." Derek gritted his teeth as Mercer forced his arm higher. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he refused to cry out. "I served this country," he growled. "I bled for it, and this is how you treat me?" Ridley's smug voice carried from the sidewalk. "Maybe you should have thought about that before moving here." Halverson slammed Derek's legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto the porch. His cheek scraped against the concrete as Mercer drove a knee into his back. Simone's cries filled the air. "Stop resisting," Halverson barked, even though Derek hadn't lifted a finger in defiance. "I'm not resisting," Derek shouted, his voice hoarse. "You're assaulting me in front of my family." The children's sobs cut through the night, piercing and raw. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on up and down the street, shadows gathering behind curtains. But no one came outside. No one intervened. Simone screamed again. "Somebody call 911! They're beating my husband!" Halverson pressed harder, pinning Derek down while Mercer yanked his wrists into cuffs so tight they bit into his skin. The officers stood him up roughly, his shirt torn, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting," Mercer sneered. Derek stared at him, his chest heaving. "You know damn well that's a lie." Halverson shoved him toward the patrol car. "Tell it to the judge." As they dragged him away, Derek locked eyes with Simone. Her face was streaked with tears, her arms wrapped protectively around the children. He tried to reassure them with a look, but the sight of their fear cut deeper than any wound. Inside the cruiser, Derek's mind raced. He thought of all the battles he'd fought overseas, the enemies he'd faced, the bullets he'd dodged. None of it compared to the humiliation of being brutalized on his own porch while his children watched. This wasn't war. This was something colder. The ride to the station was silent except for the crackle of the police radio. Mercer glanced at Derek in the rearview mirror, a smirk playing at his lips. "Should have kept your head down, hero." Derek clenched his fists, swallowing the fire in his chest. He wasn't afraid for himself. He'd survived worse. But the thought of his family alone, with Ridley circling like a vulture, gnawed at him. Back at the house, Simone sat on the floor with the kids huddled in her arms. Her voice shook as she whispered, "We'll get him back. We won't let them break us," but even she didn't know how. But Derek's arrest wasn't the end. It was the spark. And sparks have a way of catching fire when the right people hear about them. The next morning, Simone sat in the kitchen staring at her untouched coffee, her hands trembling. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Derek's face pressed into the concrete, his voice shouting that he wasn't resisting, the kids crying as police dragged him away. Her phone sat on the table, filled with unanswered texts from worried relatives. But none of them knew what to do, and truthfully, neither did she. At dawn, she dressed the children quietly and drove to the county jail. They sat in the back seat with wide, fearful eyes, clutching their backpacks even though they weren't going to school. When Derek finally walked out, bruised, cut, his wrists raw from the cuffs, Mia ran to him, sobbing into his stomach. Caleb hugged his leg fiercely, whispering, "I thought they were going to take you forever." Derek bent down, pulling them close despite the pain. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed Simone on the cheek, noticing how pale she looked. "They didn't break me," he whispered. "Not even close." But the damage was deeper than bruises. At the station, officers had booked him on charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. When Derek asked for the incident report, the words made his stomach turn. Subject became combative, refused lawful commands, attempted to strike officers. None of it was true. The lies were written as fact. Simone read it too, her eyes wide with outrage. "They're rewriting the story. They're making you the criminal." "That's what they do," Derek said bitterly. "They control the paper trail. Without proof, it's their word against mine." By noon, the gossip had already spread through the neighborhood. As Derek limped across his yard to retrieve the trash cans, he noticed neighbors whispering, staring from behind their fences. One man shook his head like Derek was some cautionary tale. Another ushered his kids indoors. Ridley, of course, strolled down the sidewalk with his usual smugness. "Tough night?" Ridley asked, feigning concern. Derek ignored him and kept walking. "You should think about moving," Ridley called after him. "Would be easier on everyone." Derek's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay silent. That was exactly what Ridley wanted, an outburst he could twist into another accusation. Later that day, Derek tried calling the police department to file a complaint. The desk sergeant cut him off almost immediately. "Mr. Cole, our officers followed protocol. If you feel otherwise, you'll need to file through the proper channels." "And what are those channels?" Derek asked. "Internal review," the sergeant replied flatly. "But I'll warn you, these cases rarely move forward. In other words, don't bother." Simone sat with him that night, holding his hand as he stared at the bruises on his arms. "We can't fight this alone. They've already decided what the truth is. We need help." "Help from who?" Derek asked. "A lawyer?" "The HOA's got money. The police have the department backing them. It's us against the system." She was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "What about your old team?" Derek looked at her, caught off guard. He hadn't thought about those men in months. They had all scattered after leaving the Navy, some to private security, some to civilian jobs, some disappearing altogether. But they weren't just men he had served with. They were brothers. And if anyone understood loyalty, it was them. "I don't want to drag them into this," Derek said softly. Simone squeezed his hand tighter. "They'd want to know. They'd want to stand by you. Isn't that what you all swore? To never leave each other behind?" The weight of her words hung heavy. Derek remembered nights overseas, sitting shoulder to shoulder with men who promised to fight for him as he would for them. He remembered Ethan McGraw's voice, steady in chaos. "We protect our own." He glanced at his phone on the table. His thumb hovered over the contacts list. He didn't know what to say, how to explain that the enemy wasn't overseas anymore. It was right here, wearing badges and wielding clipboards. Before he could decide, Caleb padded into the room, rubbing his tired eyes. "Dad, are they going to come back?" Derek pulled his son into his lap, holding him close. Not if I can help it. But deep down, he knew Ridley and his allies weren't finished. The beating wasn't the climax. It was just their opening move. And if Derek didn't act soon, the next attack might be worse. That night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, he thought about the men he'd fought beside. Men who knew what it meant to stand your ground against impossible odds. For the first time, Derek considered making the call. But once word reached his old Navy SEAL brothers, this fight would no longer be. The house was quiet that night, but Derek's mind wouldn't let him sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of a passing car felt amplified in the silence. He lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Simone's steady breathing beside him, the kids asleep down the hall. His body ached from the beating, but the deeper wound was inside, the shame of being paraded in front of his family like a criminal, the helplessness of knowing Ridley and his allies were still out there, plotting their next move. Finally, he sat up, reached for his phone, and scrolled through his contacts. There it was. Ethan McGraw. Derek hadn't spoken to him in months, maybe longer, but the bond they shared didn't need constant upkeep. Ethan had been his commanding officer on their last deployment, a man with a sharp mind and steadier hands than anyone Derek had ever met. When Ethan said, "We protect our own," it wasn't just talk. It was a code. His thumb hovered over the call button. For a long moment, Derek hesitated. He didn't want to sound desperate. He didn't want to drag Ethan into a mess that looked, on the surface, like a neighborhood dispute. But this wasn't about property lines or HOA rules anymore. This was about power, abuse, and the safety of his family. He pressed the button. The line clicked after 2 rings. "Cole," Ethan's voice came, gravelly and alert, even in the late hour. "Been a while. You okay?" Derek swallowed. "Not really. I need your help." There was no pause, no hesitation. "Where are you?" Derek exhaled, his chest tightening with relief. "Texas. Small town outside of San Antonio." "It's bad here, Ethan. Real bad." "Tell me," Ethan said simply. And Derek did. He recounted everything. The HOA harassment, Ridley's smug threats, the officer's intimidation, and finally, the brutal beating. His voice cracked when he mentioned Simone holding the kids while he was dragged away. There was silence on the other end when he finished. Then Ethan spoke, low and steady. "Send me the address. I'll be there, and I'll bring some of the boys." "You don't have to," Derek began. "We look after our own," Ethan cut in. "Always have. Always will. Sit tight." When Derek hung up, Simone stirred beside him. "Was that Ethan?" Derek said softly. "He's coming. They're all coming." Simone's eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. "Do you think that'll make things better or worse?" Derek kissed her forehead. "I think it's the only chance we have." The next morning, Derek went about his routine, but there was a new energy in his step. Even as neighbors whispered and Ridley strutted by with that same smug grin, Derek held his head a little higher. Reinforcements were coming. By evening, the first car rolled into town. A black pickup with out-of-state plates pulled up to Derek's driveway, and out stepped Ethan McGraw. He was broader than Derek remembered, with short-cropped hair and a calm presence that immediately steadied the air. "Cole," he said with a grin, pulling Derek into a firm hug. "Hell of a mess you've got yourself in. Good to see you, brother," Derek replied, his throat tight. 2 more vehicles arrived not long after. Out came men Derek hadn't seen in years. Ryan Tate, who used to crack jokes even in firefights. Miguel Alvarez, quiet but fierce. And Sam Patterson, whose scar across his cheek told its own story. They weren't in uniform anymore, but the way they moved, the way they scanned the street as soon as they got out, it was clear the bond never left them. Inside the house, Simone greeted them with gratitude, though her worry was evident. "I don't know what you all plan to do, but thank you for being here." Ethan gave her a reassuring nod. "We're not here to stir chaos. We're here to make sure Derek and the kids are safe, and that the truth comes out." That night, the men sat around the dining table, the same spot where Derek had been helping Caleb with homework just days before. But now the conversation wasn't about math problems. It was about survival And strategy. Ryan leaned forward. This Ridley guy, he's just a coward hiding behind his friends. But those cops? That's the real threat, Miguel added quietly. If they think they can keep this buried, they're wrong. We can bring pressure from outside, media, legal, whatever it takes. Derek shook his head. They've already written their version of the story. No one around here is going to speak up. Everyone's too scared, Ethan tapped the table. Then we find people who aren't scared. We shine a light where they don't want it. They can't bury you if the whole world's watching. For the first time in weeks, Derek felt something stir in him that had been crushed under fear. By the next afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood that Derek wasn't alone anymore. 4 new vehicles sat in his driveway and along the curb, and unfamiliar men moved in and out of the house. They weren't loud, they weren't reckless, but their presence was undeniable. Neighbors peeked through blinds as Ethan and the others carried bags inside, their movements precise, their conversations low. It wasn't intimidation, it was discipline. And yet it unsettled people in a way Ridley's clipboard never could. Ridley noticed immediately. He pulled up in his silver sedan, parked halfway in Derek's driveway without asking, and stepped out with his usual air of entitlement. He crossed his arms and watched the men unloading gear. "So, this is the cavalry?" he sneered. Ethan, standing near the garage, didn't bother raising his voice. "You must be Ridley." "And you are?" Ridley shot back. "Friends of the Coles," Ethan replied evenly. "We're here to make sure their rights are respected." Ridley laughed under his breath. "Their rights? This is a neighborhood association, not a battlefield." Ethan took a step closer, his calm presence carrying weight. "You're right. It's not a battlefield. So stop acting like a tyrant." Ridley's smirk faltered for just a moment, then returned. "Careful who you call names. I've got influence here. More than you realize." He turned to Derek, who had walked out onto the porch. "You think hiding behind your little military buddies is going to protect you? This won't end well." Before Derek could respond, Ryan stepped out of the house and joined Ethan. His voice carried a sharp edge. "I've seen your kind before. Guys who think power gives them the right to crush people. You don't scare us." Ridley scoffed, muttering something under his breath as he walked back to his car. But his tight grip on the door handle gave him away. This was the first time anyone had stood toe-to-toe with him. That evening, the SEALs made their presence known in another way. They walked with Derek and his family down the block, not as bodyguards, but as friends. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact suddenly found themselves confronted with a group of men whose quiet confidence was impossible to ignore. Nobody said much, but the silence was louder than words. Derek wasn't isolated anymore. Later, Simone watched from the porch as Ethan and Miguel set up cameras along the exterior of the house. "We're documenting everything," Miguel explained. "If the cops show up again, there'll be no question what happened." She felt a weight lift off her chest. For the first time since they moved in, she didn't feel alone in the fight. But Ridley wasn't sitting idle. That night, a patrol car circled the block twice, headlights sweeping across Derek's lawn. Mercer sat behind the wheel this time, his eyes narrowing when he saw the cameras blinking red. He slowed, rolled his window down, and called out, "You think cameras are going to save you?" Ethan, standing in the yard, walked toward the curb. His voice was calm, measured. "They'll save the truth, which is all we need." Mercer's jaw flexed. "Stay out of this." "You're not from here." Ethan leaned slightly closer, his tone still even. "Doesn't matter where we're from. Wrong is wrong everywhere." The patrol car idled for a moment longer, then pulled off, tires squealing. Simone exhaled deeply from the porch, her heart pounding. Inside, Derek sat with his old teammates at the dining table. The air was heavy with strategy. "They're not going to stop," he said. "If anything, this is going to make them angrier." "Good," Ryan replied. "Anger makes people sloppy. That's when they slip up." Miguel tapped his laptop. "I've already sent a packet to a contact in Dallas. Reporter who's covered corruption cases before. Once we've got hard evidence, she'll run with it." Sam leaned back in his chair. "We've also got connections in the veteran community. Word spreads fast when one of our own is targeted. Ridley and his pals won't know what hit them. Derek rubbed his hands over his face. I never wanted it to get this big. I just wanted peace. Ethan placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Sometimes peace doesn't come by avoiding conflict. Sometimes you have to confront it head-on. That's what we're here for. Simone listened from the kitchen, her chest tightening at those words. They weren't men looking for revenge. They were men determined to see justice done. The next day, Ridley made his move. He called an emergency HOA meeting, claiming Derek's property was lowering the neighborhood's standards. It was a thinly veiled attempt to rally support. But when Derek walked into the community center flanked by Ethan and his team, the atmosphere shifted instantly. People who had once whispered about Derek now avoided Ridley's gaze. The balance of power was beginning to tilt. But as the SEALs pressed forward, Ridley and the officers weren't about to surrender quietly. They were about to push back harder, and the stakes were about to rise even higher. By the following week, the tension in the neighborhood was like a storm cloud that refused to break. Ridley strutted less than usual, but he wasn't done. If anything, the presence of Derek's old team had lit a fuse inside him. He doubled down, filing more violations with the HOA and sending out letters warning residents that certain homeowners were undermining community standards. His words dripped with dog whistles, and though he never said Derek's name, everyone knew exactly who he meant. But this time, Derek wasn't playing defense alone. Ethan and Miguel had already pulled together recordings from the security cameras, the night patrols, the aggressive confrontations, even snippets of Ridley's smug threats. Miguel packaged it all into a secure drive, along with Derek's bruised photographs and the falsified police report. They weren't just telling a story anymore. They were building a case. One evening, as the men sat around the dining table, Miguel opened his laptop. I sent the files to two people, a reporter in Dallas who doesn't shy away from taking on crooked officials, and a veterans legal group out of Austin. Once they move on this, Ridley and his buddies are going to feel real pressure. Ryan leaned back, smirking. They picked the wrong man to mess with. Cole's not some loner they can steamroll. He's got brothers. Derek shook his head, still cautious. They're not going to roll over. Not Ridley. Not those cops. They'll fight dirtier now. He wasn't wrong. That weekend, a patrol car lit up Derek's driveway again, but this time the officers didn't just idle. Halverson stepped out and started taking photos of the house like he was documenting a crime scene. Ethan walked outside calmly, phone in hand, recording everything. Officer Halverson, what's the purpose of your visit? Halverson lowered his camera slightly, his lip curling. Routine check. On private property? Ethan pressed. Without a warrant? Halverson's glare flicked to the blinking red light on Ethan's phone. After a tense beat, he muttered something under his breath and walked back to his cruiser. The tires squealed as he drove away. Simone, watching from the porch, whispered, If the cameras weren't here, they'd already be inside. Meanwhile, Ridley's grip on the HOA began to slip. At the emergency meeting he called, several neighbors actually spoke up for the first time. A middle-aged man, clearly nervous but determined, said, Mark, this has gone too far. I don't care about trash cans or basketball hoops. We all saw what happened on Derek's porch that night. Kids shouldn't have to watch their father get beaten like that. Others nodded, murmuring agreement. Ridley's face turned red, his clipboard trembling in his hands. He barked back. You don't understand. This man is a danger. He's disruptive. But his words didn't carry the same weight anymore. People had seen too much. Later that week, the Dallas reporter called Derek directly. Her voice was sharp, professional. Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the footage and your documentation. If you're willing to go on record, this could run as early as Monday. Derek hesitated. Going public makes us bigger targets. Ethan, sitting beside him, gave a firm nod. It also makes it harder for them to bury you. Derek closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke into the phone. I'll do it. My family deserves the truth out there. By the weekend, the story broke online. Texas veteran alleges harassment by HOA and local police. Caught on camera. Within hours, it spread across social media. Photos of Derek's bruises next to screenshots of Ridley's smug grin, ignited outrage. Comments poured in from veterans, parents, and ordinary people across the country who saw themselves in Derek's fight. That same night, Ridley stormed up Derek's driveway, his face twisted with rage. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You think your little media stunt is going to save you? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ethan stepped between them, his calm voice cutting through. "Back off, Ridley. This isn't your playground anymore." Ridley jabbed a finger toward Derek. "You just declared war." Derek's voice was steady, unwavering. "No, Mark. You did the day you brought cops to my door." The confrontation ended with Ridley storming away, but everyone knew the battle lines were drawn. The difference now was that Derek wasn't fighting alone, and the world was watching. But pressure can only build so long before something breaks, and soon the fight would reach its breaking point. The article hit harder than anyone expected. By Monday morning, local news vans were parked on the street, their cameras pointed at Derek's house. Reporters shouted questions from the curb, while neighbors whispered nervously behind drawn curtains. For once, Ridley wasn't strutting with his clipboard. He stayed inside, blinds shut, his phone pressed to his ear all day. The spotlight he had once used to shame Derek was now burning him instead. The police department scrambled too. An official statement was released claiming standard protocol had been followed during Derek's arrest, but the videos Ethan and Miguel had published online told a different story. Footage of Halverson shoving Derek against the siding of his home and Mercer twisting his arm while he shouted, "I'm not resisting," was undeniable. The public wasn't buying the department's version. That evening, Derek stood on his porch with Simone at his side as a reporter asked, "Mr. Cole, what do you want to come out of this?" He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I want my kids to grow up believing that home means safety. I want the people who abuse power to know they can't hide behind badges or titles. And I want my neighbors to understand that silence helps no one." The clip ran on the evening news across Texas, then made national headlines. Soon after, the Veterans Legal Group in Austin announced they were filing a civil rights lawsuit on Derek's behalf. Community members who had once kept quiet began reaching out, some admitting they too had felt pressured by Ridley, though not as violently. His power was unraveling. The SEALS kept watch, but now their role shifted. They weren't just defenders. They became witnesses to change. Miguel coordinated with attorneys, Ryan managed the flood of support pouring in from veteran networks, and Sam reached out to families in the neighborhood, building bridges where Ridley had sown fear. One night, after the kids were asleep, Derek sat at the table with Ethan. The weight of the past weeks was written on his face, but so was something new. "Resolve. I almost gave up," Derek admitted quietly. "There were nights I thought about packing everything and leaving, but then you all showed up." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "You didn't need us to fight your battle, Cole. You just needed a reminder that you weren't alone in it. You've always had that strength. We just helped bring it out again." Derek's throat tightened. "I'll never forget what you all did for me, for my family. Don't thank us," Ethan said. "Thank the man who refused to bow down, even when they tried to break him." In the weeks that followed, momentum grew. Ridley stepped down as HOA president under pressure, his smug grin replaced by a defeated silence. Halverson and Mercer were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. And while the system was far from perfect, Derek's story became a symbol. Veterans, families, and even strangers used his name as proof that standing up, even in the face of intimidation, could make a difference. The Coles' home slowly returned to what it was meant to be. Caleb and Mia played in the yard, without Simone rushing to pull them inside. Neighbors waved more openly, some even apologizing for staying silent. The flag still flew high on Derek's pole, untouched, a quiet victory in itself. One Sunday afternoon, Derek gathered his old team around the grill. Smoke curled into the air as laughter replaced the tension that had once weighed so heavily on the house. Simone poured iced tea for everyone. The kids ran barefoot in the grass, and for the first time since moving in, the place truly felt like home. Derek looked at Ethan and the others, then at his family. This is what we fought for overseas. And this is what we're still fighting for here. Home, dignity, peace. Ethan raised his glass. To peace, and to never letting the wrong people define it. The men clinked glasses, their bond stronger than ever. And as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, Derek knew one thing with certainty. Loyalty and truth were stronger than fear. The world had tried to silence him, but he still stood tall, with brothers at his side, his family behind him, and a story that no one could bury anymore. The lesson was clear. When people abuse power, silence only feeds them. But when you stand firm, especially with others by your side, you don't just protect yourself. You change the balance for everyone watching. So if you've ever felt outnumbered, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this story. Remember that even one voice, backed